Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the weekly AI Yap, where I'll be going over this week's news in AI and all of that type of stuff and giving my thoughts on it. And it'll last roughly like 20 to 30 minutes. So, for this week's first topic, we have the new DeepSeek model R1, and we also have the new Gemini model, and also the new GPT-4 model that kind of ties into that Gemini model. And then from there, we have, and then that's kind of the really big news. Now, of course, there is some stuff going on in open source, which is mainly the DeepSeek model, but other than that, it was pretty quiet. Though there is a lot to talk about with both the Gemini models and the R1, right? And so the new, so I'm going to start with R1 because that's, I think, probably the bigger thing, which is R1 is the new model where the entire point is that it's able to do test time inference, but exclusively within like open source, right? It's an open source test time inference model. And so this is really cool because it's also not hiding the chain of thought. We're actually able to see what the chain of thought is. And of course, OpenAI showed us some of the chain of thought. But like OpenAI showed some of the chain of thought when it came to O1. But with DeepSeek's O1, we basically have the ability to see chain of thought for any type of idea we send it, right? And of course, we know chain of thought is like the thoughts of the model, right, that it's doing. We know all of that like stream of consciousness type stuff rather than I will do this, I will do this. It's more stream of consciousness type stuff and all of that. And so, yeah, we have the model and its chain of like the stream of thought is open, and then it's an open source. And of course, this is a preview right now, and when it actually goes full, they'll release the open source, and it'll be great, right? And so, in essence, we have all of that going on. We have both, and so this is actually great because now we're able to see the test time scaling laws of like intelligence and whatnot, and we can also connect this up with something like say Cerebras or Grok inference, and theoretically open source can have, because open source just has the fastest inference right now, right? Like if there's an inference time scaling war effectively, open source will win. Grok only does open source models, Cerebras only does open source models, Fireworks only does open source models. Like everybody's only doing open source models with like a really fast inference. And so if there's an inference time scaling war, open source just straight up wins because open source is willing to do custom hardware, whereas closed source isn't really as much willing to do crazy hardware type stuff. And so you have a situation where you, the moment DeepSeek open sources this, Grok is going to serve it. We know Grok is going to serve it. And if the rumors are right, this is like a 7dB model, right? Yeah, the rumors are saying this is like a 7dB model, like an 8x, like a MOE 70B-ish size model. Though I guess there's other rumors claiming it's a lot smaller than that, so I don't know what exactly to believe. But like, it's a model that's very small and it's like very capable, right? It's a model that's capable of doing a lot. And so, in essence, what we kind of get there is you kind of get like a whole bunch of like stuff where it's like it's a small model. It's way smaller than O1 because O1 is like 70B. It's not 70B. It's like way bigger than 70B. O1 mini is probably around the 70B mark, right? And so we have like kind of a little bit of all of that. We have like the ability to do the intelligence of O1 the size of a 70B, which kind of speaks to open source efficiency, right? Because open source tends to be way more efficient than closed source, and we can see it here, right? Because if O1 is like a 70B model, we can kind of see that, oh, hey, when comparing it to O1, it's like pretty competitive, and it's probably like 3x smaller, 4x smaller, right? And so, yeah, it's actually incredibly cool that DeepSeek is doing this, and there's obviously more stuff going on there. You had Alibaba with Quen, and they released the new Quen, like a new paper with a test time scaling thing that is almost totally based on Quen. And again, performs very similarly, way smaller than 401. Then last week they released Coder 32B that was also way smaller than 40, yet it was still very competitive, right? And so because of open source living under very strict hardware constraints, open source had to make much smaller and smaller models. And because open source is making smaller and smaller models, we have a situation where, you know, open source is kind of doing all of that, where it's just like, oh, we can run small models very fast, and so yeah, in test time scaling land, open source just kind of wins. Now, of course, if you're trying to do pre-training like size scaling, then yeah, closed source does a lot better. But you know, with open source scaling and whatnot, you know, open source will just do a whole lot better. But yeah, so I think I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to talk, and now I think I'm gonna talk about the new Gemini model because the new Gemini model is great, and the whole situation around it is great. And so, so the story goes back to last week, right? So last week, uh, Google released Gemini Experimental 114. Or I'm just gonna call it Gemini Experimental November 14th, right? Because they released it November 14th. It's the experimental model. Makes sense. If they had turned out an actual model, that probably would have been Gemini Pro 3, given the size and all that. But Gemini Experimental November 14th. Pretty good. Now, what they are trying to do is they're trying to do. So then OpenAI this week, they released the new GPT-4o, right? GPT-4o latest in whatever the date was, I believe Wednesday, right? So on Wednesday they released it. Then yesterday, Google released Gemini Experimental 1121, right? So Gemini Experimental November 21st. And so, it was way better than the 4o, right? Because last week's Gemini was like matching the current 4o, and so OpenAI is like, oh, let's release the new 4o. Then Google released the new Gemini that's better than the new 4o, right? So they currently have the best model again, except for a few situations where Claude is still better, right? Claude is still better in a few situations, but again, new model from Google that is, of this scale of like the scale of what's roughly a pro, and it's the best model available, right? Like nobody's trying to make like giga scale models. Everybody's kind of peaking out at 400B, right? So again, scaling law issues. But the new Gemini is like very, very good. Like I believe, like obviously open source was catching up to Gemini when it came to image recognition, but this one is just better at image recognition. It's better at dealing with text. It's better at all of that. And it's just kind of a model that's kind of way more capable than it was before. And I think the Gemini is probably the best model out right now, excluding the reasoning models, right? If you include the reasoning models, obviously the reasoning models don't do as well in chatbot arena because they're worse. But like they're pretty good. They're pretty good. But yeah, it's a whole thing where you basically have like, I think Google, what they did here is they released like a subpar Gemini last week, so that this week they can release a better Gemini, so they can bait out the OpenAI releasing a model, and they release a new Gemini now, and it's going to be better, right? Because OpenAI did this to Google, right? Like OpenAI is pretty consistently like, we will announce something before Google, we will announce something after Google, and we will take all the media share. But now Google's doing the same thing, and Google's just releasing better models. Now, obviously, if you look at brand recognition and all of that, Google models aren't as popular in usage as like OpenAI's models, but like, come on, Google's models. Like, the research here is very brand new, right? Like, I saw a tweet, right? And the tweet went along the lines of, oh, you're still using Gemini Experimental 1114 instead of switching to the far superior Gemini Experimental 1121? Are you not keeping up with the field? It's like, and it went later on to, like, how it's, like, it's very hard to be able to keep up, which makes sense, right? Which is the reason this podcast is a thing. But, like, Google is, I think that they might just do weekly model releases or, like, something of that sort. Maybe this is a one-time thing, but, like, Google's just kind of releasing models very, very quickly, and they're releasing a lot of models. And so, yeah, you just have, like, Google releasing new models, very, very, like, a lot of them. And then you have OpenAI also getting in there. You have Anthropic that also is probably going to release models later, right? But, like, again, they've been a little bit more quiet. Because, again, they're, like, a smaller scale lab than Google and OpenAI, which is a little bit strange to say because they were at the same scale as OpenAI, like, a little while back. And, like, Google's obviously been a much larger lab for, like, a very long time. It's just they have a bunch of different projects. But, like, now Anthropic, it probably feels like Anthropic is kind of being, like, left behind, right? Like, obviously Claude Sonnet's very good, right? I'm not disputing that. But Anthropic, they said they're releasing 3.5 opus earlier, but it's now gone. Like, that's never happening, right? Then they said they were going to do a bunch of stuff. I think they're just kind of getting restricted by, like, compute, which is why they also signed the thing where AWS is now investing in them another $4 billion, and now the cloud partner of choice is going from GCP to AWS. But the main problem with that is now, I guess all three cloud providers now have a model team, right? Like Azure has OpenAI, AWS has Anthropic, and GCP has Google, right? Though of course GCP used to have Anthropic and Google, but like thing is, we have basically built like the models. They're now getting to the point where you like everybody's just kind of realized, oh, there's clearly a winner here. So like Google's not really going to invest that much more money in Anthropic because like if they're TPU compute bound, they'd rather have that compute go to the Google DeepMind than Anthropic, right? Because it's like, oh, if a TPU goes to Gemini instead of Claude, it's like Gemini will better. They don't really care about Claude that much. They just had to deal with Claude so they could serve it on GCP because people like Claude. And so, again, like obviously, you have each individual lab. They release like a new model. Like I'd say every like 4 to 6 months, roughly the model release cycle at this point, right? Not really. It's probably close to like a year for like a full generation, but like 4 to 6 months for like a 0.5, right? So like you had the first GPT 4.0 to now that's probably like a GPT 4.0.5, right? The first Claude 3 Sonnet to now, that's like 6 months, right? Claude 3.5.5 Sonnet or 396 or whatever, right? Whereas like it's a pretty substantial capability bump, but it's not like a new generation per se, right? Same thing with Google. They announced Gemini Pro back in like April, and then 6 months later, we have some models that are like, they're a pretty good jump, but they're not like GPT 3.5 to 4, right? They're not like a massive jump. And I think basically all the labs are like that, like 1 year for a massive jump, every 6 months you get like a halfway improvement, right? So, like if you compare this, right, if you look at, let's say, Llama, they've been releasing some smaller and smaller stuff recently, but like they just took like, you know, they announced they're training Llama 4 right now on 100k GPUs, right? So Llama 3 was trained on 16k GPUs, Llama 4 will be trained on 100k GPUs, and Llama 4 is, again, it's going to be a step change over Llama 3, right? So Llama 3 was a step change over Llama 2, Llama 4 will be a step change over Llama 3, Llama 3.1 and 3.2, they're like 6 month improvements, right? And so I expect Llama 4 to come out probably like February, March, maybe April next year. And again, Grok 3 was training, and they had training issues and whatnot. And again, 6 to 12 months until it becomes better and better, right? And so, yeah, we're just kind of seeing this general trend of like, hey, you get like big improvements year on year. But then when it comes to OpenAI, maybe 01 counts as a big leap, but like again, I don't think the capabilities in purely inference time are like better, like purely training time, sorry, are better than like the original GPT-4 by like a step change, right? It's not like a step change over GPT-4. Maybe they've just been releasing more, but I doubt it, right? I think fundamentally it's not a massive step change over, you know, what it was before. And so what you have basically is you just have like all of these models just kind of doing stuff, and they're all kind of independently doing stuff, and they're all independently doing stuff differently and whatnot, and all the labs are focusing on different things, right? Because again, as I've been saying constantly, Google's focused on long context, right? Then you have OpenAI, they're now focused on test time inference. Claude is focused on data scaling and whatnot. Meta's focused on like pure scaling, but also like open source, like brain time scaling. You have DeepSeek, who is focused on doing whatever it takes to make the best model so that they don't get killed by the CCP. You have Quen, who's focused on trying to do efficiency scaling, like make the models more efficient, and then hopefully they'll be better. Right, like you have all these companies who are trying to do scaling of like efficiencies, and like they're all trying to scale different things, and you know you just have a situation where they're all like pretty good. They all happen, and they're pretty good models at like what they're doing. But like again, you have like people scaling different things, and they're all going in different directions. But then when one person comes up with a breakthrough, like OpenAI with O1 and test time scaling, other people are trying to copy them now, right? So 2 months ago they released O1, and then now you have DeepSeek O1. That's like legitimate test time scaling, right? You're doing test time scaling of all one, you're doing test time scaling of all of that. And so you just kind of have the thing where all of these models are like, once somebody makes a breakthrough and then they go public with what the breakthrough is, everybody else is copying the breakthrough, right? Whenever, like Mixture of Experts, OpenAI didn't make public, but then when Mistral made public, everybody was doing Mixture of Experts for a while. And then people realized, wait, you know, at least in open source, people realized, wait, people are GPU VRAM limited, they're not really performance limited. And so what they had to do is they just had to go back to dense models, right? And again, Llama's a dense model. People like dense models. And so when they went back to dense models, GPU VRAM issues went away. But again, a mixture of experts is purely a technique, right? Like R1 is rumored to be a mixture of experts, right? Mixture of experts is again just a technique that people can use to make the models better and do all of that type of stuff. So yeah, you just have a whole bunch of different types of scaling and whatnot. And I think with the new Geminis that are coming out, I don't know if this is like, if it's just like training steps, right? Because obviously what Google's probably doing is they probably have like a standard OLHF that they apply on training checkpoints, right? And so obviously the OLHF is expensive, but like if maybe somebody on the Gemini like API or like AI Studio team or like Logan Calpatrick, I think that's his name, but don't quote me on that. If they go and they're like, hey, this base model feels pretty good, can we release it? And then the Gemini team says sure, they'll just go through the standard post training steps and then they'll like release it, right? And so that's cool. But now effectively they release models. They're able to release models very quickly now, right? Again, OpenAI is also releasing models very quickly because now instead of the dated ones, they're coming out week on week, right? So next week there's gonna be new models. Next week after that there's gonna be new models, and so you just have all of that going on. And I think fundamentally OpenAI they've kind of lost the plot, right? They've kind of generally lost the plot. They're kind of not doing all of that, and so you have all of that. Now, of course, you also have the AI image generator space that I'm not too well versed in, but I want to report on some of the news there, which is the Flux. They have like infill and whatnot. So they have like text fill, they have a bunch of other fills, right? So they have infills, and I mean that's cool, right? That's generally like infills are great. All of that's kind of a great idea. It's just you don't have like I don't know. It's like infill's a great idea. It's just fundamentally you don't have all of the you know it's like it's not like a full model, right? Like they're using Flux as an infill model, they fine tune it on infilling, and it's infilling, right? It's better at specific use cases, and that's kind of the AI I like, where it's like it's good at a specific use case, but it's really good at that specific use case, right? And so if you have a specific use case that you're doing really well at, that's actually really nice because if you're an AI developer or like an AI application developer, you can pick the best model and be very good at what you're trying to get it to do, right? Like if you're trying to build something that's like feeding in massive textbooks, you can feed it like you can feed all these models like you pick Gemini, right? Gemini's best long content, but you also have options there, right? Not particularly good options when compared to Gemini, but you have options there. You can, if you're trying to do like multimodal stuff, you can feed in to like multiple modals to like a multimodal model, right? Like you can use something like Chameleon or like Spirit LM or even Gemini, or 4o. But then for your different types of data, different models are better, right? For images and like video and whatnot, Gemini is better. For like text and plus like maybe a little bit of multimodal, maybe Claude is better, right? It depends on your data mixture, and you kind of have to pick, right? Like you can pick stuff and whatnot, right? And so you have like a thing where you have all of these different models that are coming out, and they're all good at different things, right? And if you're trying to cost optimize, you go to like Llama, you go right, like you have all of these models. You have to pick which one you're trying to do and whatnot, and it's just like it's a great time. It's a great time because fundamentally all of these models are hitting like a Pareto frontier, right? And maybe they're like pushing it forward a little bit, right? But they're all hitting like some sort of Pareto frontier where people are making trade-offs between different stuff. But then you as an application developer, you know which direction you're trying to optimize in, right? Like if your like stuff is like maybe like 90% text, 10% images, you pick up one model. Whereas if you have 90% images and 10% text, you pick another model, right? And so you have to pick which place on the Pareto frontier you're trying to do, and it's a great thing. And so yeah, you have all of that, and then you also have a thing where you're trying to build stuff, and maybe you can use multiple models in there, right? Like if you have a situation where you have something like data streams, one of which is like entirely images, one of which is entirely text, one maybe which is like audio, and you're trying to combine them all. Instead of picking one model and saying let's just go with that, you pick three models, each of which are like best at images, audio, text, or whatnot, and you combine them all into one model that's able to like handle all those three streams, and then you have multiple models that are able to handle your multimodal data, and then you're able to build these like large systems around these models. And I think fundamentally that's a great thing, right? That's a great thing that is going on where you can kind of do a little bit of everything. You can kind of do a little bit of A, a little bit of B, and that's kind of where I think I see us all going, right? Where maybe one lab wants to try to get everything, there'll at least multiple models that do multiple things, or even like a really good multimodal model. But again, we've seen that multimodal models aren't really better at text. They're better at like video and like maybe like audio and images and whatnot, but they're not really better at text, right? And so that's kind of what most of the benchmarks and all the prestigious. So I think companies, I don't think they might not release like multimodal models like purely, but they'll release like I think they'll release like multiple different models that like fit different use cases instead of just the current small and cheap, big and expensive, maybe something in the middle, right? I think they'll release something on all the scales and like a little bit of all of the levels. And yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it for this week for the podcast. This podcast was live streamed on Twitch with a live chat currently of only 2 people. But like, if you join in, you can ask questions and I will talk about the stuff. I thank you all for watching this right now, and I hope you all have a good day. See you next week for the next episode of the Weekly AI Yap.